was all smiles as Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad visited Beijing. But he had some things to talk about that might not have pleased Premier Li Keqiang or any other high-level Chinese official.
Well, I agree with you that free trade should be the way to go. But of course, free trade should also be fair trade. We do not want a situation where there is a new version of colonialism.
Finishing up a 5-day trip to China, Mahathir said 2 projects, both financed by China, would be cancelled until Malaysia is able to afford them. They include the $20 billion East Coast Rail link. It was already on hold pending talks over pricing and corruption claims.
I hope that China, and I believe that China, will look sympathetically towards a problem that we have to resolve and perhaps help us in resolving some of our internal fiscal problems.
Malaysia's saddled with $250 billion in debt. Mahathir blames the previous government led by Najib Razak. The former leader wooed Chinese investment and was a cheerleader for President Xi Jinping's International Belt and Road infrastructure and development projects. But Mahathir has questioned the value of the deals and says they risk leaving Malaysia indebted to Beijing. He did, however, use his trip to stress the benefits Malaysia stood to gain from Chinese technology and entrepreneurship.
This is definitely a trip for Mahathir to offer unequivocal assurances that China-Malaysia relations will be friendly and assure China that the future direction, any drastic change is not on the table, and that if anything, it will be as positive as ever. And this will be the big picture that serves the background against which these renegotiations must happen.
With its current debt, there's no doubt Malaysia will want to keep China as an economic ally. But China also needs Malaysia to ensure its ambitious Belt and Road strategy stays on track. The question now is how much compromise both sides are willing to accept. Samantha Vadas, TRT World, Beijing.
Well, for more on this, Anne Lee joins us now from New York. She's the CEO of a new technology investment consortium, Coterie, and the author of the book, Will China's Economy Collapse? Thank you so much for your time. Firstly, this was a huge election issue for Mahathir. These Chinese-funded projects worth more than $20 billion collectively. We heard there Mahathir appeal to Beijing's understanding over his decision to cancel them. Do you think Beijing was sympathetic?
Well, Beijing really doesn't have a choice. Beijing would like to complete its Belt and Road, and Malaysia is an integral part of this. I think Beijing realizes that Malaysia is under a lot of pressure from the U.S. because after he was elected, the U.S. sent, the Secretary of State, someone from the Defense Department to speak to him, and I'm sure that the U.S. is putting pressure on Malaysia to delay the Belt and Road Initiative or cancel it if possible, because the U.S. does not want China to expand the Belt and Road, which they see as a threat politically and economically to the U.S. in that region. And so Malaysia's caught in between these two powers, and he walks a very delicate tightrope here in terms of trying to appease the interests of both countries.
Yes, and I'd like to come to the Belt and Road Initiative in just a moment, but Mahathir was worried about Malaysia falling into what some analysts have called the Chinese debt trap, in which countries who have welcomed China's easy money into their country have found themselves heavily indebted and in some cases have been forced to cede control of some key strategic assets. It's happened in countries like Sri Lanka and a couple of countries in Africa as well. I'm wondering, in your view, is this debt trap a real worry for countries who have welcomed in Chinese investment?
I actually don't think so, because China had lent billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to African nations, and most of them couldn't pay it back, and China simply forgave those loans. So in essence, they became pure aid. And a lot of countries saw this and therefore continued to choose China as their lender of various infrastructure projects because they know that China will eventually cancel the debt if they can't repay it. And so I think that this is, again, Malaysia's bending to U.S. pressure to use a stall tactic because, frankly, if Malaysia couldn't pay it back, I'm sure China would simply renegotiate it or cancel the debt. But at this point, I think China realizes that, they have to play this game. Malaysia will likely go and ask to renegotiate a lot of the contracts so that maybe more local workers are used as labor in building the infrastructure so that more of the money that's being used will stay in the local economy. He's also likely to ask for lower interest rates on some of the loans. And so I think that, these will all be negotiating points that will be used, and who knows how long this will delay. But right now, China will have to play along.
Yes, and before we let you go, Anne, you mentioned China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, which is the resurrection of the Silk Road trading routes and then some across the world. I'm wondering, how should countries navigate the approaches by Beijing to expand that new Silk Road through their nations?
Well, I think that Beijing is simply trying to grow the economic pie, and so that it's not a zero-sum economic situation. Beijing would like for other nations to grow just as robustly as China has been. And so, if these countries can work with Beijing to figure out how they can also benefit from it, I think that it is certainly a very positive outcome. And given that, they know that U.S. right now is also an interested party. They have more levers to negotiate with
I'm so sorry
Beijing.
to interrupt, but we'll have to leave it there. But we do appreciate your time from New York. Thank you so much for that.